The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
At the CJ Show, we continue to provide hard-hitting news whenever we can. And that includes the latest on Connor McDavid. We all know about his future, whatever that could be. And the latest with him, he's back with Leon Draisaitl in training camp, CJ. That's the hard-hitting story we're going to start off with for our episode today.
Yeah,
hard-hitting journalism.
A little bit of a dog ate our homework beginning there, right? But I will say, though, for those that have listened to our Monday show this week, we were doing kind of going around camps and hitting on storylines and be like, is this a real story or not? I think this is an interesting one because one of the stories, of course, we talked about was the fact that Connor McDavid started the first couple days of camp with a player on his wing, David Tomasek, who has had a long career in Europe, but doesn't scream first liner for a team trying to win the cup. And I do think the fact they're pivoting in this direction, obviously for the short term, while Zach Hyman continues to rehab from his injury, tells us a little something about the Oilers. I think it's so important for that team to get off to a good start. They've kind of struggled out of the gates the last couple seasons. And while they've obviously got it more than together and gone on long playoff runs, I think that this is a bit of a tone setting move, from Chris Knobloch and, for Connor and Leon. I mean, they've just had so much success together as individuals. It's kind of a no brainer on some level, but, it does expose maybe some of the lack of depth maybe they have behind them in the forward groups. And so, I think it's an interesting experiment. It's also interesting to me that he's come out and said it, 2 weeks before the season begins. I mean, we always applaud honesty here at the CJ Show, but, usually it's not an accident when a team chooses to do something like that because it obviously breaks from protocol. I mean, you were telling me, Julian, about being around Travis Green this camp. He's like, don't read anything into lines, don't make any big deal out of anything. And then here we have, the coach of the Edmonton Oilers saying this will be the line to start the year already so soon. So, I mean, different approaches for different coaches.
I feel like you added way too much more energy on your Travis Green there, explaining not looking too much into lines. He's so much more like laid back, like borderline surfer bro with the way that he's like, don't look too much in the lines. Also, the fact that you could hear him at all, that's for another day. But no, my next question.
Come on, Mendez, get the mic working there. What's going on?
I'm sure Mendez is going to love that chirp. So my next question with Connor and Leon, because you're absolutely right. They're the offensive talent together. We've seen them paired together, but you know what we've also seen? Those two eventually separated, because what always happens is it makes sense to put them together, but then you want that offensive talent spread around the lineup. Those two get separated. What then?
I mean, probably they get separated, right? It's sort of like, it must be every coach there that's, and they've had a number with those players. Like, it becomes a bit of a safety blanket. What's interesting to me is you usually go to this look when you need a goal, right? Like, it's something that you can show within a game for a period or what have you. To start with it is, again, I do think that it tells us something about them really wanting to get off on the right foot, have those players be at their absolute best. I mean, really, they might be tailoring the team in some ways to making sure those guys really get their confidence early too. And it's such a big deal, big season in Edmonton. I almost think you can't put too fine a point on it. We focus so much specifically on the McDavid, what's going on with his contract situation, and it's still, all quiet on that front. But it's also just any team that's lost in consecutive Stanley Cup finals. It's, trying to get all the way back and win one more series. But, you can't do that on September 25th, right? You have to kind of go through the process of playing out the season, even these preseason games that are happening right now, 82 regular season games, and then, somehow find your way back through the playoffs. I mean, I do think that there's a little bit of a specific challenge for the teams that have been through it. I noticed, I don't know if you saw this, by the way, down in Florida, Paul Maurice kind of kept his veteran players away from the first days of training camp. Like, they were doing some side work on their own but they weren't really part of the sort of practices the way I think other teams are doing it. You can, again, understand why. They've been to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals and they've won the last 2. But, training camp it's a different beast for the teams that played most recently. It's a different tone in markets where the last game was on April 15th and, you're trying to sort of, get everyone's attention and crack the whip and push everyone to their fullest. I think in places like Edmonton and Florida in particular, but probably, Dallas, having been on a couple long, playoff runs themselves, some of it is about, you want to start the structure, start building for the season, but also understanding, my goodness, it's a long year for these guys.
I still think Florida gets out to a so-so start, and as they recuperate, they end up being a wild card team. I'll probably say I don't have a problem being wrong. I would just be very surprised if they came out the gate swinging and we saw them as a top 2 team in the Atlantic this year, just because of all the mileage they've had. That doesn't mean they're bad. They're still, I think, the class of the East. It's just regular season doesn't matter.
No one's going to suggest they're bad. Matter. It's just
no one.
But you also wonder where how much left to give there is, where the give a crap meter is set to, being without Matthew Tkachuk, who obviously they were without for, a couple months at the end of last season prior to the playoffs starting after the 4 Nations. I mean, they've done it all before, so to speak. They also lost Aaron Ekblad in that point, right, with his PED suspension. So they've won games with something less than their best lineup in the past. But I think that every year presents a different challenge, even for a great team. Rest in peace, Ken Dryden. One of the interesting parts, if you ever read his book, The Game, was him talking about almost like the internal battle the 70s Canadians got into. That was a team with Ken Dryden that won 4 straight Stanley Cups and frankly dominated the league, basically winning on average 60 out of 80 regular season games over 4 years, plus winning those Stanley Cups. And it becomes almost like your biggest opponent is you. When you're a team that's that good, that knows you're that good, that's proven you're that good, but you still have to try to find a way to prove it time and time again. So, there's a reason why no team, I guess, since the Islanders, who won 4 straight after the Montreal Canadiens, has even won 3 in a row. We've had some great teams in the meantime, starting with the 80s Oilers, but, through to the Red Wings and the Avalanche of the 90s, the New Jersey Devils, into the Cap era, obviously with the Penguins and the Blackhawks, and the LA Kings, won 2 out of 3, but winning 3 in a row is a gargantuan task. And, as you say, sitting here now, you wouldn't necessarily say Florida can't do it, but the odds, frankly, are not in their favor, even with as great a team as they have.
I didn't mean for the segment to go from Edmonton to Florida, but
that's
really
where
glad
we finished last season, right? I mean, it's kind of,
yeah, I like that we did.
It's been sort of bookends. I mean, I like the idea of having 2 straight finals the exact same. I know that there could be some fatigue in markets that you're not rooting for either of those teams, and you're just like, we've already seen this. But I think it almost like it ups the storyline value for those franchises.
So what if we got a third? What if we got a 3rd straight year of Edmonton, Florida?
I'd be down for it, honestly. I mean, we don't control this stuff, but I think it could still be compelling. Now, sometimes it's how you get there and what's going on. I mean, I think the Panthers' second run to the final, in some ways, you had the whole Brad Marchand element, really spiced things up. And, he finished second in Conn Smythe Trophy voting, could have potentially even won that. So, it wasn't, even though it's the same team winning, it wasn't winning in the same way. And there were some changes there. I mean, I sign me up for that right now if that's what it is. But of course, I'm okay if it's something different too. I mean, the great thing is truly, I don't think there's a bad matchup really when you get to the final, especially if you get a 6 or 7 game series with a little bit of drama in it.
Is this Oilers team as constructed with the fact that they've infused some new players? They get Ike Howard from Tampa to try to get some younger players, and they keep the goaltending as is with Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard. I get it. You have 97, you have 29. Anything's possible. Do you think the roster as it is right now is good enough to get back to the Cup final?
It is because of the 2 guys. I know that's like a kind of an obvious take, but I actually believe that. I think that, no other team in the league, there's other teams with 2 horses. You think of Makar and McKinnon. but there's no team with two horses quite like that. I don't think. I mean, quite honestly, in a world where if Connor McDavid left the Edmonton Oilers, and this is just a hypothetical, like Leon Draisaitl is still a top 5 centerman for sure in the league. Like they would still have the kind of player you need, generally speaking, to win in this league. Like I guess my point is you wouldn't just fold up shop and say like, okay, they're cooked. So it's special to have that combination. So I think as long as you have that, plus, they do have a lot of supporting players that have been through those runs that I think have shown that they can help. While the goaltending is, it is what it is, that those same two goaltenders did get them to 2 straight cup finals. So I can't sit here and say they can't do it again. So, I don't think the Oilers today are necessarily better. But there's still several months before they have to be better in a sense. Like there's still time to make moves. There's still, address holes. I wonder even about losing a player like Evander Kane, which was really a cap decision that Edmonton had to make in the offseason. Like I think when you talk about being ready for the playoffs, his impact in the playoffs the last couple of years has been really strong and plays the kind of style that, I think will be missed in some ways for the Oilers. So, but they're obviously hoping Trent Frederick, a healthy Trent Frederick this year, can fill in that manner. So, it's kind of an interesting experiment there, but I don't think I can sit here and say they're better, but I don't also believe they're measurably all that much worse off this year. But they did lose some role players, just cap stuff and guys going away in free agency. So, they've got to prove it yet again. And they're obviously hoping someone like Howard or Matt Savoy, or, that they can get a little bit of push up from younger players that weren't part of the mix last year.
Yeah. Fascinating. I mean, every team has their reasons to be fascinating. You can make the argument again that there might not be a team more interesting than the Edmonton Oilers. And I'm wondering if all the talk about McDavid's future, even if the players don't want to think about it, if it's something that's going to stick in the back of their minds as long as this situation lasts, of course, because you can always sign game 20 into the season on a 2-year deal and then you forget it.
Well, where do you land on that? Like I'm in the camp that it's definitely a story and we're going to keep talking about it, but I'm in the camp that I don't think it impacts what happens on the ice that much.
Sure.
That's just where I sit.
I'm just curious if it does. Like if it is, I mean, probably I can understand if it didn't, just off the fact that so many guys just have their own lives and they can only really focus on themselves. And I'm sure Connor would address that situation with his teammates at a time that he feels is necessary. But I am intrigued if it is something that just we're talking about the best player in the league. Like, how do you not think about that? Especially if you're signed for a couple of years and you're wondering about your future on this team and you're wondering about what life could be without number 97.
But if you're those players, aren't you, if anything, it's like more seize the day kind of mentality, I would think, because I don't mean that it gives you more motivation to try to win. Obviously that's always there, but it's like, we might not get this again. Like it almost just like clarifies that you can't take for granted what they have in that dressing room right now. So I think you could maybe sculpt the narrative that not that it's good for the Oilers, but that it's good for this version of the Oilers this season. The one thing I'll note, and I don't think we talked about this, Connor McDavid did a 7.5 minute scrum on the first day of training camp. I watched the whole thing through. There was one question about his contract, and it was the second last question. And it was even asked kind of meekly. It was just sort of like, oh yeah, there's that other thing. Like, is that anything? It wasn't like a hard hitter. So I think in a weird way, from a PR standpoint or from a media standpoint, he's kind of gotten through the first wave of what that will be. Now, I'm not going to, the obvious is the obvious. If they start 0-5, that people will go back to the contract pretty quickly. Like if something goes wrong or if the team's in some amount of disarray, but assuming they're just a good team for the most part, it's going to get brought up from time to time, but I don't know that it becomes this like paralyzing circumstance. But, at the same time, we haven't really seen this too much before. There's been star players, obviously the Panarins, the Tavarises, Mitch Marner last year. There's been star players go through and become UFAs in their prime, but no one of this ilk and no one on a team that's been to 2 straight cup finals too. That's the other part of this.
Yeah. It's a fascinating scenario. We're going to be on top of Connor McDavid, that entire story, as long as we can be on top of it. We're not going to stop until contract gets signed. Or maybe a contract doesn't get signed. Who knows? Anyway, I want to do a goalie roundup as we continue our Thursday edition of the show. I want to go to Toronto. Some news dropping this week about Joseph Woll. He is away for a personal family matter. Obviously hoping the best for him. I'm curious what that means for the Leafs goaltending situation and anything else you can add to that.
Well, I think it's possible the Leafs end up having to just look for a little more veteran help at some point. And that could have always been the case. You'll recall, last year they had Matt Murray in the number 3 spot, essentially in the organization. Dennis Hildeby, who's now the backup and who has recently signed a new deal, also played NHL games last season for the Leafs. But, we're at a stage, whether it ends up being on waivers, perhaps, because the tricky thing with third goalies, if you're not carrying 3 on your NHL roster, there's some pretty good goaltenders, or at least goaltenders with a reasonable track record that end up going on waivers. So that could be something to watch in Toronto. And really, my early sense is, and I've respected the Leafs' wishes with Joseph Woll in terms of not trying to dig into his privacy, obviously wish him the best, and his family, whatever's going on with his situation. But, my sense is there's not exactly a time where he's expected to be back as of now. Like this isn't a case of, okay, I got to leave for a week and I'll be back on October 2nd. Just to, it seems like there's a little uncertainty about, how much time it's going to be for him to work through what's going on. So, I think that as a result, at least puts a situation out there where you have to consider it. Now, in the short term, Brad Treliving has told the reporters in Toronto, that's not what's on his mind. So, I think that with Hildeby, there's at least a little hope that he's got the ability to help them carry it. But, it's a different circumstance, right? This was kind of a 50-50, goalie job last year. It didn't always go that there were some injuries and things that changed it, but more or less by the end of the season, it was every other start, was being moved around. And now, I think the Leafs are going to probably lean on Anthony Stolarz a little harder than they might have, to start. Now, again, we'll have to see where things go with Joseph Woll. So I think it's a little bit day by day. You don't want to get too far ahead of yourself with where things can go, but basically it's a long way of saying, all options are open and there will be other players, veterans, I think, that the Leafs could look to bring in if they needed to stabilize the situation in the short term. But, Anthony Stolarz, this is a big year for him. He's in his contract year. As we've talked about, the Leafs have engaged pretty seriously on trying to sign an extension. And, now we see where that ends up if he can get that deal done. And then ultimately, I think he's probably in position, just even from the fact that he's getting all these reps in training camp that Joseph Woll isn't during his personal leave of absence, to start more of the games in October than maybe he might have.
Okay. As we continue our roundup with goaltenders, what's the latest surrounding Carter Hart and his availability?
Well, he can officially do his deal as of Wednesday next week. Basically get the visa process started, relocate to the city and all those things. At this point in time, it sounds like Vegas is the favorite to land Carter Hart. He's looking for opportunity on a team that can win. And it's hard if you look around, the way that the chair is set up right now and at the goaltending position to think or to find a spot where I think more starts would be available to him. Akira Schmid is the backup currently to Aiden Hill, played only a handful of NHL games himself last season. He's also a young goaltender, but, even with Hill, I have no idea how it's going to go for Carter Hart, but it's a chance to, that's a team trying to win a Stanley Cup. And I think it will truly be a goaltending competition, for starts as the season goes along there. So, nothing can be official till October 1st. But at this point, it does seem like things are headed in that direction. It's going to be, it's going to be an interesting ramp up from just the hockey side of things because Carter Hart hasn't played in the NHL since January 2024. Didn't play anywhere professionally, even while the pretrial proceedings were going on with the sexual assault case in London. The other 4 players that were in that case did all go to Europe at various points. And so they played professional hockey more recently, but he does get basically a month and a half tune-up window before he's eligible to play a game again on December 1st, and will likely go to the AHL. So, we're getting close. It'll be next week where we get clarity, I think, on some of those players. And I do expect at least a couple of them to sign pretty much as soon as they can to start ramping back up towards their NHL careers.
One more goalie story. I've noticed you've been on it, and I'm kind of intrigued myself. In Tampa Bay, what's going on with Andrei Vasilevskiy? For whatever reason, hasn't always been I shouldn't say always been, just he's been limited in terms of his practice availability with the Lightning so far. What's been going on with him? Yeah,
he did a pretty funny media availability on the opening day camp when it was the media day. Pretty blunt assessments of their early playoff exits in recent years and some things that need to change, and then really hasn't been seen from much since. And there's been a bit of a degree of mystery around what's been going on with him. It sounds like he felt something in the early days of camp. And I think that the Lightning, and given the circumstances of where they are and what he means to them, and even, he's 2 years removed from a back surgery that forced him to miss a bunch of time at the start of the season 2 years ago, just wanting to be very cautious with his health situation. So, it's one of those ones where no one's hitting the panic button or, but you just start to watch. I mean, it's not necessarily usual for a player to start up at camp and then immediately be sidelined. And, I think obviously it's going to depend on how his body reacts to whatever treatment he's getting when he gets back out there again. But until that happens, it's going to grow into a little bit more of a story, and no need to hammer on how important Vasilevskiy is to the Lightning. I mean, he had a really tremendous season for them last year. I know they ended up out in the first round of Florida quicker than they would have liked, but he had a big bounce back year for Tampa. And any circumstance where we're talking about Tampa as a cup contender, which I do believe they are, involves Andrei Vasilevskiy being an important part of that mix. So, the organization is being careful with him, but they're trying to signal that it's nothing too serious. And I guess in the meantime, all we can do is wait and see where things end up.
Okay, that's our roundup on goalies. Anything else percolating in the brain? I look around at some of the different situations going around the league. Obviously, with my time spent in Ottawa and Calgary, I'm looking at those two markets. I'm thinking of the fact Rasmus Andersson still hanging around on the Flames roster. Shane Pinto had a really good preseason. We were talking about it off show about whether or not when he gets signed, because he's a pending RFA. Those two stories for me, obviously, are top of mind. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to those two, or any other story that we need to bring up that we don't really talk about as much on the show. Well,
let's start with Pinto, right? He's entering the last season of his deal, be a restricted free agent next summer. There have been discussions with the Senators in his camp about, what an extension could look like, but it's not really an easy contract to do. I mean, you're talking about a player who, clearly has tremendous upside. His best years are still to come. He didn't have a full season last year. He sat out the first couple months of the year due to that gambling related suspension that he had to serve. But he's shown all effects since then that he's going to take a jump, and clearly is a player that Travis Green has a lot of faith in as well. So where this goes, I think we have to kind of see how it plays out, because if you're the Senators, there's some risk, I would call it, that he plays the full season and he kills it in every way. And then, maybe there's a chance to sign him a little sooner, at some kind of what could be a discount or not. I mean, obviously he's not going to be in a position to give that discount. So I don't think, because he hasn't had a full season, production wise, where where it's at, it could be a tougher deal to do. But obviously in this case, both sides are, I think, willing to take a stab at that. And, it's one of these ones where, maybe for him, he wants that security, or maybe it's better just to play it out and see how it goes. Right. I think that's kind of like the interesting aspect of it, but, certainly didn't escape my attention, watching him score a couple big goals in a preseason game. I know they're not big goals in terms of, the outcome of that game, but he ties it late for Ottawa in their game against Toronto earlier this week, and then scores, a nice goal in overtime too, using his speed there. So, this is a guy who's clearly an important part of the Senators' present and future, and they've got to get him signed. I mean, what's your sense? Is it?
I wanted to just make a point here. The big thing for me is, what do you have in Shane Pinto? You talking about some of his last few years where he had an 82-game season in 22-23 where he scores 20 goals. Then the year after, there's the gambling suspension, and he only gets 9 goals and 27 points. And then last year, he plays 70 games. He gives you 21 and 37. Is this a guy who's going to get you 25 this year? Is he a guy who can get you 30 this year, or even at any point in his contract? And in terms of where he's placed in the lineup, he's like a number 3 center. He gets a lot of defensive responsibilities, though. Even if he is a number 3 center, this is a guy who got trotted out against Austin Matthews and the big boys on the Toronto Maple Leafs last year. Number 3, maybe in name only, but this is a really important center on this team. Is Dylan Cousins. I wonder about his $7.1 million contract, AAV. Does that work as a comparable, considering what Dylan Cousins has been able to do and what Shane Pinto's has also been able to do and could do? Like, I wonder if the contract goes between, like, is 6.5 mil a starting point, and then you go up from there. I'm just wondering myself. No real intel there, but I wonder how tricky that negotiation is going to be.
Well, it could be, but the other side here too is there doesn't need to be urgency, right?
No.
He effectively has to be signed by October of 2026 to be playing games next season. But I guess where you don't want to end up is you don't want to end up in the same position that Mason McTavish finds himself in Anaheim right now, or Luke Evangelista in Nashville, Luke Hughes in New Jersey. I mean, those are players sort of similar to Pinto in that they're RFAs that haven't been able to reach a deal for this season, and they've now each missed a week of camp. The ideal would be to find some kind of solution in the meantime. But, if they can't do it in the short term, Julian, I think the easiest way to go is to see what he does this year. And then you have a true base of where he's at in that moment, entering that next deal. And I think that in some ways could maybe sharpen the focus on what the comparables are. But if you're the Senators too, if you really believe in the player, I mean, we've seen teams do this now where you sign someone extremely early. Sometimes those gambles pay off, sometimes not so well. Right. I think there's been a couple examples recently where guys with 40, Frank Nazar in Chicago had 50 odd games, give or take, in the NHL and signed a big extension. And there's obviously a little bit of a bet placed in those circumstances. So, I think it's one to monitor, especially if he gets off to a hot start, might up the urgency to get something done. And similarly, if the offers just aren't where he needs, I mean, there's no reason for Shane Pinto. It's not a sign he's leaving town or anything. There's a lot of time here still to get that next deal done.
Yeah. Shane Pinto, to me, we are nowhere near a point where the Senators are even thinking about, moving him or anything like that. It's just a matter of when he signs and how much he signs for. He seems like he's going to be a pretty important player for this team as they, obviously try to be more than a playoff team. They want to be a contender, obviously. So Shane Pinto,
getting those foundational pieces signed too. Like if they see him as a core member of the team, like I think there's value in locking up those pieces for a long window. Obviously we've seen Ottawa do that with some of the other deals they've signed here over the years, but a lot of the best players on this team, whether it's Jake Sanderson or Brady Tkachuk when he did his last deal, I mean, you've seen them give out longer term contracts to players. And so to me, ideally, and sometimes ideals go out the window when you actually get down to negotiations, but ideally you're talking about locking him up and giving him that security and knowing that this is what our team's going to be as we look to kind of keep building on that playoff run last season.
I want to go to Calgary really quickly just because I mentioned Rasmus Andersson. We've talked about him before. We've talked about his situation, and you kind of brought up the last time we talked about him, what would happen if this Flames team got good, they get to the deadline, and they have to think about keeping him. And then to hear you guys on Insider Trading this week and to hear the idea that maybe it's not out of the question that Rasmus Andersson extends and stays in Calgary. I don't know. From a distance, I'm like, is that the right move? I don't know if that's the right move. I don't know. Like, I think he's a hell of a player, and when he's healthy, he's a really good defenseman to have on this team. But after all that, to keep him instead of being in a position where you could offload him for assets, like, I don't know. I'm not sure where I fall on that. I'd like to know your opinion on that.
Well, I think it's a tough decision for the front office because there's definitely a spot there if they want to pay him, give him an 8-year deal and, basically give him a big raise. I think that there's a path to getting a contract done for Rasmus Andersson, but you're right. Is that the best thing for the organization? Even as good of a player as he is, even as valuable in that dressing room as he's been, clearly one of the trusted voices around the Flames, sort of one of those players. Reminds me a little bit of like the way Jake Muzzin was in his prime, or like really tells it like it is, almost like a bit of a conscience of your team to some degree, like isn't afraid to call out or discuss a difficult situation or a time when things aren't going well. Basically valuable on all kinds of levels, what he can produce on the ice, but also what he brings to your group. I think Craig Conroy is ultimately going to have to weigh, what the value of losing that is versus keeping it, especially if you end up signing a contract that doesn't age well. I mean, this is where GMs get paid the big bucks for, essentially. I mean, these are not easy calls. And, the other factor here is that I don't know what kind of assets you're getting for Rasmus Andersson in the scenario where you're trading him unless he's signing an extension, right? I mean, clearly the price on him is different if you're selling him as a rental player at the deadline or near the deadline or someone with term and an extension in place. So, that's something that's going to play itself out. I think in some ways that the Flames, mind right now just seems to be, okay, let's start the season and see where this group's at. Because, while they did come so close last year to making the playoffs, I would say it's not a foregone conclusion. They're going to have that kind of season again. And yeah, I mean, as a result, this is going to be a player who's in a lot of focus around the league because I don't think the Flames right now are of a mind of extending him, but they haven't closed the door on the possibility either. So it's one of these weird ones a little bit. I mean, it almost reminds me, not quite the same, but Brock Besser last year in Vancouver seemed to be so far out the door for most of the year. And then, right before July 1st in free agency, signs a long-term extension with the Canucks. I mean, I think based on that example alone, you can't rule out something similar happening in Calgary. It's not a prediction, just pointing everyone's idea to the fact that we don't always know exactly where these things are going to go. I'd say if you're setting the odds, or the most likely scenario is that I do believe Rasmus Andersson will be traded before March 6th or at March 6th at the trade deadline. But it could be a good year in Calgary. They could come back together. He could have maybe even a resurgent performance on the ice and give the Flames a little bit more of a push to be like, hey, we can't lose this player. And, the fact that skating isn't necessarily, you know, one of the top parts of his game. I think that there's also a little reticence to, you know, how long is too long on his contract and all those things. So, you know, it feels like the nice thing here is maybe because he is that kind of conscience, honest guy. I think that there's been a lot of honest conversations back and forth. I mean, he was nearly traded in the spring, and he knows that, and we know that. It's been reported and discussed to the Vegas Golden Knights. The trade didn't happen, but I just get the sense that that's going to make things a little bit better. That you know, I don't see this impacting his play in a negative way, and you know, basically we got to see where Calgary's at, and you know, again, I still think he's likely on the move. He's going to be on the next trade board whenever it is. I'll tell you that much. It'll spoil the surprise, but it's not 100% guaranteed because you never know what could happen or develop over a season.
How long until you have to actually put together said trade board?
I think last year the first one was in late October. So I would assume the same. I haven't talked to my editor Jake about that yet, but you know, that one, the way we did the first one, I can't remember exactly how we built it, but it was sort of like 10 early players to watch on the trade front. Like we weren't saying these guys are getting traded next week. It'd be interesting to go back and look how many ended up getting moved. Like I remember one I had on that board that didn't was Nikolai Ehlers. I think I might have had him 10th. You know, obviously with him being in a contract year, but some of the other players for sure that were on that board, did get moved. I mean, look, you never know. I had Brad Marchand kind of low on the trade board for a lot of the season And it really wasn't until the last few days or the last 2 days, maybe before the deadline, where I was certain he was going to get traded. Because, you'll recall there were discussions right up pretty close to the deadline with Boston on him extending there. So, it's a bit of an imperfect science. I shudder to think that I got to get back into that again soon. But in all honesty, it's a great exercise, and it's kind of a fun challenge, like piecing together little bits of information, little things I hear, and trying to best reflect where the trade market is at any given time.
Okay, as we wrap up our Thursday edition of the CJ Show, I have a proposition for you.
Okay,
so we normally do stick taps to end our Thursday show, but on our Monday show, you were asked, what's the funniest story you have from your time covering the NHL? I was going to say, we could have you tell that story, and that could wrap our show, and then we can bring back stick taps next week. Because getting you to think of this, it took a lot for you to think of a funny story. To get you to do that and stick taps, I feel like we're asking for the moon here.
Well, I don't know if it's the funniest thing ever, but certainly among the dumbest I've ever felt would have to be, I'll take you back, dear listeners, to June 30th, 2016, which is a long time ago now, but for those of a certain vintage will know that was a pretty big day in the world of hockey. At that time, you'll recall Steven Stamkos was on the verge of becoming a pretty notable free agent. Had been meeting with teams during what then was allowed to be like an interview window. You had some trade rumors blowing in places like Nashville, where there was, concern for them, trying to get over the hump with a team that was very good, but not quite good enough. And even their captain, Shea Weber, was in some trade rumors. There's a lot going on in hockey, but in my world, I had just come off covering a long playoff run. I was the San Jose Pittsburgh final, which was not a particularly easy one on the travel. We all bitch about Edmonton, Florida. San Jose Pittsburgh really wasn't all that much different in terms of just spending full days traveling. And so on June 30th, 2016, I had an impromptu nap, and it happened to be a nap when everything went crazy in hockey. Do you remember what happened in order that day? Was it the Subban for Weber deal? So was Taylor Hall traded that day?
Taylor Hall for Adam Larson was first.
Which wasn't even rumored, if I remember. I think that one just kind of came out of the clear blue sky.
Came out of the clear blue sky. Within minutes, PK Subban for Shea Weber. And then within minutes of that, Steven Stamkos signs an extension. All within couldn't have been longer than 30 minutes. Deal after deal after deal. It was just a crazy afternoon.
And not only was I not breaking any of those stories or contributing to the reporting on them, I was asleep.
Oh my God.
I can't remember honestly feeling worse, waking up and seeing just whatever chaos was on my phone, and probably bosses texting or calling or anyway.
That's scary. That's embarrassing. But man.
Well, here's the thing.
I'm sorry.
It's not embarrassing. It's
that's embarrassing. I would think I'd be mortified.
Well, you got to live your life too. I mean,
yeah.
It didn't happen. I was exhausted, obviously. I don't even take many naps. I'm actually not really a good napper. I just have trouble kind of settling my mind usually during the day because of stuff like this. Usually there's a lot of stuff kind of going on, and I'm not one to relax and get into a napping formation. So, I don't know if that's that funny of a story, but
I think that's a crazy story.
I'll tell you,
you slept through one of the craziest off-season days ever in the history of the National
literally
Hockey
asleep
League.
on the job. It's a wonder that I still have a career at this point, honestly.
Thank God you do.
Because I'll tell you, even now, sometimes if I'm doing something, obviously I like to go for runs or whatever. And if I run in the middle of the day, I'm always worried about not being around for a Mark Donk for a 6th round pick trade or something like that. Something that really, with respect to Mark Donk and his family, isn't necessarily huge NHL news. So to be worried about that on a day-to-day basis and then sleep through 3 of the more seismic moves you could have all happening within minutes of each other. What's crazy about that day, as much as I reflect on it, those moves aren't really tied to each other. Like sometimes you see a series of moves and it's because one team was waiting to try to trade for this guy. And then like they go to an, like, it's sort of like everything is directly tied together. In this case, it just, I guess the only link on June 30th is that decisions had to be made ahead of July 1st. So that was what tied those moves together. But it wasn't a case of like 3 defenseman trades because teams were waiting on what was going to happen with Subban or Weber. Anyway, I live to see another day. So if there's a lesson in that, maybe it's that, you're going to have some bad days at work. It's not always going to go your way, but most people forget and you move on.
I hope you know that story is going in the book.
I love that.
As long as you're cool with it, it's definitely in the book.
I mean,
it's
I'm cool with it. I mean, like, look, it's a thing that happened. You can't, as everyone knows that listens closely to this show, I'm an open book. So that's the truth. On June 30th, 2016 was not my finest day in this industry.
And stick taps to Chris Johnston for being able to rise above it and tell the story and move on from it. Good on you.
It's still in the back of my mind, though. Still, don't love that happened.
I could understand that. But hey, man.
And then he never napped again.
Oh man, it's okay. We all make mistakes, and yes, I will spare you stick taps. We'll bring that back for next Thursday. Ask CJ will bring back for Monday coming. Get your questions in now. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. CJ, great work as always.
We got through an episode with not even mentioning how much the Blue Jays are just melting down right now, but
I was trying to protect your peace, sir.
Well, I mean, I'm not as fired up as I might be having spent most of the season on the sidelines as a fan, but still not loving it. Great weekend ahead, though. Ryder Cup, for me, It's hard for anything to match the drama at any sporting event of what the Ryder Cup can be. I'm predicting a Team Europe win on the road at Bethpage. Not something that's happened too much over history, but I think that they got it. Obviously, another weekend of NFL football ahead. And then can the Blue Jays completely burn up their season over these remaining 4 games?
I was about to say, you could, no optimism. You don't think the Blue Jays are going to turn it around?
No. I mean, at this point, they're giving up more runs each game than they're getting hits. So, for any conspiracy theories or concerns anywhere else other than the fact they can't score runs, I mean, it just feels like everything's going wrong at the wrong time, and I don't know how quickly you can piece that back together.
Well, as a neutral observer, I can't wait to see what the CJ Show group chat will be like as the Toronto Blue Jays go through this excruciating weekend. I'm very excited for it. I'll be in Quebec City watching preseason games and enjoying the city.
Awesome. Great city. Have a safe trip, pal.
Will do. Talk to you guys on Monday.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.